The covert conflict between Iran and Israel exploded into open warfare on June 13, 2025, as Israeli warplanes launched a massive airstrike deep inside Iran. Operation Rising Lion, Israel's preemptive campaign, targeted Iran's nuclear program, marking a dramatic shift from years of shadowy sabotage to direct confrontation. Over 200 Israeli aircraft struck more than 100 targets, signaling a new era of open hostilities and shattering any illusion of containment. Iran retaliated with a barrage of attack drones, most of which were intercepted by Israel's advanced air defenses, but the psychological shock was profound as millions rushed to shelters. The world watched in alarm as a long-feared state-on-state conflict erupted, threatening to ignite a wider regional war with global consequences. The June 2025 war marked the violent climax of a decades-long shadow conflict between Iran and Israel, a struggle that simmered beneath the surface of global headlines for years. While the world watched, both nations engaged in a relentless contest for regional dominance, each move calculated, each response measured, yet always inching closer to open warfare. This conflict was fought not just on traditional battlefields, but through cyber attacks that crippled infrastructure, assassinations of key figures, and proxy wars waged in neighboring countries. Shadowy operatives and militias became the face of a war that was everywhere and nowhere at once. Israel's covert strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, often shrouded in secrecy, and Iran's increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks on Israeli infrastructure escalated tensions to new heights. Each side tested the other's resolve, pushing boundaries and setting new precedents for modern warfare. The world watched as tit-for-tat attacks grew in frequency and intensity, with both nations sending clear signals that neither would back down. Intelligence agencies raced to predict the next move, while civilians braced for the fallout. The collapse of nuclear diplomacy, after years of painstaking negotiations, left the international community powerless. Iran's rapid uranium enrichment, captured in satellite images and confirmed by inspectors, pushed Israel ever closer to considering military action as the only remaining option. A turning point came in October 2024, when Israel launched a daring strike deep inside Iran. The world held its breath as Iran responded with a massive missile barrage, targeting Israeli cities and military sites. For the first time, both sides demonstrated their willingness to engage in direct, high-stakes confrontation. The final trigger was the IAEA's formal censure of Iran for expanding its nuclear program beyond agreed limits. This public rebuke convinced Israeli leaders that preemptive action was no longer just an option, but a necessity for national survival. Years of failed negotiations, Iran's relentless nuclear advances, and the looming threat of direct missile attacks created a perfect storm. The region teetered on the edge, with every diplomatic failure and military escalation bringing war closer. In the early hours of June 2025, Operation Rising Lion was launched, Israel's answer to a threat it deemed existential, and the world was forced to confront the reality of a new, devastating conflict in the Middle East. Operation Rising Lion began in the stillness before dawn, as the first rays of sunlight crept over Israeli airfields. The world was unaware that history was about to change in a matter of hours. Israel launched a massive aerial assault, deploying over 200 of its most advanced fighter jets, bombers, and drones. The scale and precision of the operation were unprecedented, with pilots briefed for weeks and intelligence meticulously gathered. The mission's primary targets were Iran's most sensitive nuclear sites, Natanz and Kandab, along with key missile production facilities believed to be central to Iran's nuclear ambitions. In addition, Israeli warplanes struck at the heart of the IRGC's command infrastructure, aiming to disrupt Iran's military coordination and response capabilities. The objective was clear: to cripple Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon, and to send a message that Israel would act decisively to protect its security. In a televised address, Israel's prime minister called the operation an act of self-defense, stating that the nation could not afford to wait for international diplomacy to succeed. Years of negotiations and diplomatic efforts had failed to halt Iran's nuclear progress, leaving Israel with what it saw as no other choice. Intelligence reports indicated that Iran was on the verge of weaponizing its nuclear program, raising the stakes to a critical level. The strikes were designed not just to delay, but to set back Iran's nuclear ambitions by several years, buying precious time for the region. Yet the operation carried enormous risks: potential for massive Iranian retaliation, regional escalation, and condemnation from the international community. Over 100 strategic targets were hit in coordinated waves, each carefully selected to maximize impact and minimize civilian casualties. The aftermath revealed extensive damage to Iran's nuclear and missile programs, with emergency crews scrambling to contain fires and assess the destruction. Inside Israel, military and government leaders watched anxiously, knowing the operation marked a point of no return in the conflict with Iran. Israel had gambled everything on a decisive blow, hoping to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran and reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. As news of the strikes spread, the world braced for the unpredictable consequences of this high-stakes gamble at the heart of a volatile region. The Israeli strikes unleashed a wave of destruction across Iran, decimating not only military installations but also the very core of Iran's leadership. The attacks were swift, precise, and devastating, targeting the nerve centers of Iran's military and scientific command. In a calculated effort to cripple Iran's strategic capabilities, top commanders and key nuclear scientists were killed. These losses were not random. They were the result of months of intelligence gathering and careful planning designed to leave Iran's defense and nuclear programs in disarray. The deaths of high-profile figures like Mohammad Hossein Bagheri and Hossein Salami sent shockwaves through the Iranian establishment, creating a sudden and dangerous leadership vacuum at the highest levels of command. The loss of leading scientists was equally devastating, dealing a severe blow to Iran's nuclear ambitions and halting critical research projects. Laboratories lay in ruins and the scientific community was left reeling. Tehran scrambled to fill the gaps left by the fallen, as government officials convened in urgent crisis meetings, desperate to restore order and maintain control. But the regime's stability was shaken to its core. Civilian casualties mounted as the chaos spread, with hospitals overwhelmed and emergency services stretched thin. Reports emerged of residential buildings struck by missiles, leaving families mourning amid the rubble and entire neighborhoods devastated. The human cost was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, in Israel, the population was gripped by fear. Though spared direct casualties, Israelis endured sleepless nights as air raid sirens blared, families huddled in bomb shelters, and the threat of retaliation loomed large. The true cost of the operation was measured not just in immediate losses, but in the scars left on both societies. Cities lay in ruins, and the sense of security was shattered for millions. As military convoys mobilized and mass funerals filled the streets, it became clear that this was only the beginning of a prolonged, bloody conflict that would claim many more lives. Both nations now faced a future overshadowed by vengeance, instability, and the ever-present specter of a wider, more devastating war that threatened to engulf the entire region. Iran's immediate response was a swarm of over 100 attack drones launched at Israel, a show of resolve rather than a true counterstrike. Israel's air defenses, Iron Dome, David's Sling and Arrow, intercepted most drones, preventing major damage but underscoring the nation's vulnerability. The psychological impact was severe, as millions experienced the terror of direct attack and the reality of open war. Military analysts saw the drone barrage as only the beginning, with Iran's vast missile arsenal and powerful proxies still in reserve. Supreme Leader Khamenei vowed severe punishment, hinting at a broader, more destructive retaliation to come. The conflict had moved from covert operations to a direct, multi-domain confrontation. The world braced for escalation, knowing the next moves could reshape the region. The Israeli strikes triggered global alarm, with the US distancing itself and urging restraint while allies condemned the escalation. Western nations called for calm, but most criticized Israel's attack as dangerously destabilizing, fearing a wider war. The United Nations pleaded for restraint, but diplomacy collapsed as nuclear talks were canceled and alliances frayed. Arab states condemned Israel's actions as a violation of sovereignty, highlighting Israel's diplomatic isolation. Russia and China seized the moment to criticize Western policy, deepening global divisions. The crisis paralyzed international institutions, leaving the world to watch as the conflict threatened to spiral out of control. The Middle East stood on the brink, with the fate of the region and global security hanging in the balance. The outbreak of war sent shockwaves through global markets, with oil prices surging and investors fleeing to safe havens. Fears of disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil artery, drove Brent crude up by nearly 7% within hours. Stock markets tumbled worldwide while gold and U.S. Treasuries soared as uncertainty gripped investors. Airspace closures over Iran, Iraq, and Jordan forced airlines to reroute or cancel flights, disrupting global travel and commerce. Israel's economy braced for the costs of war, while Iran's already battered economy faced further devastation. The prospect of a prolonged conflict threatened to fuel inflation, disrupt supply chains, and undermine global growth. The world economy now faced a new era of volatility, with the Middle East once again at the epicenter. With the first blows exchanged, both Iran and Israel prepared for the next, more dangerous phase of conflict. Israel weighed further strikes to ensure Iran's nuclear program was crippled, risking deeper international backlash. Iran, vowing severe retaliation, considered unleashing its missile arsenal or activating Hezbollah to open a second front. The cyber war was set to intensify, with both nations targeting each other's critical infrastructure in a shadowy digital battle. The U.S. increased its military presence, seeking to deter escalation while avoiding direct involvement. The world's response in the coming days could either contain the crisis or fuel a regional inferno. The path ahead was fraught with peril, with every decision carrying the risk of catastrophic escalation. As leaders strategized, ordinary Iranians and Israelis bore the brunt of war, lives upended by fear, loss, and uncertainty. In Israel, cities fell silent as families sheltered from attack, the psychological toll mounting with each siren and explosion. Iranian civilians faced devastation, economic hardship, and the trauma of war brought to their doorsteps. Hospitals braced for mass casualties, and daily routines vanished under the shadow of conflict. The war's true cost was measured in shattered lives and futures held hostage by decisions made far from the front lines. The June 2025 escalation stood as a tragic testament to failed diplomacy and the catastrophic price of unresolved conflict. As the world hoped for peace, millions struggled to survive the grim new reality of a war that had finally stepped out of the shadows.